The really neat thing about these motion presets is that they're actually just starting points for your animation. Every single property that they set up, you can go back in and change, and you'll just be modifying your animation from where the preset started it. Let's move the playhead back to the beginning of the animation, and let's take a look at the starting point. Our camera starts right in the middle of the screen because that's where we had it originally. But what if I wanted it to fly in from off screen? Well, all I actually have to do is grab a hold of that beginning position and move it off screen. You can see that my path stretched out to meet the new starting point position, and if I hit the Enter or Return key to play the animation back, you can see that it starts off screen now and just flies on screen. I'm getting all the same motion and all of the same effects, but with my new starting position. I could change the end position too. If my playhead is set up at the end of the animation, all I'd have to do is move the camera here. Let's move it over to the left a little bit, and you can see my timeline and my path adjust exactly the same way. I can change any of the other properties I want to as well. I'm not restricted to just position. For instance, our animation ends with the camera at 100% alpha. Well, if my playhead is down at the end of the animation, I can change that alpha to whatever I'd like it to be. Let's say I pull the slider down to about 50%. You can see that my camera now is a little bit transparent, and if we drag our timeline around, we can see that the animation now goes from completely transparent and eases its way up to 50% at this point. The path changes are even better too. Let's go back to the start point for our animation. I'll pull the camera down into position. You can see that my path adjusts, but the really neat thing is that this path doesn't have to be a straight line. It's actually a Bezier curve. And in our earlier chapters, we saw that we could just use the normal selection tool to modify any Bezier curve shape in the program, including these paths. So if I just bring my cursor over the path, let me bring it to a point where we can see that cursor, and you see that it changes just exactly as if this was a vector shape into that little arc. And that means we can click and drag the path out. And you see how we can modify the path just as if it was a normal vector shape in the program. When I drag my timeline across, you can see that it follows that path exactly. And basically, we can put in whatever vector shape path we want. When we first applied the motion preset, you saw how it took over that frame span. Well, we can apply a preset over top of this one, and it'll do the same thing. If I go back into the motion presets panel, and I pick out a different animation, let's try one of these blur ones here. I'm going to do a fly in blur right. There we can see that blur effect. I'll click Apply, and it asks me if I want to replace that current motion. Now I'll just click Yes, and all the settings from our previous animation, including the frame span itself, will be replaced with the new preset. And there you can see a fly in right. I'll click on the camera icon at the very beginning of the animation, and remember our filters down here at the bottom. That's where we're getting our blur from. We've got a big X blur, and that X blur is reducing as the element flies in. Now we just saw how we could change the beginning and ending points of the tween, but we can also move the entire tween if you want to. To do that, click on the path for the tween and make sure the entire path is selected. Over in the property windows, it'll confirm your selection by showing that you've got the entire motion tween now and not just the camera icon that we were looking at before. When that's selected, just grab the path and bring it on up wherever you want it to be. I'm going to set it right up here in the top of my animation, and let's see what that looks like in the timeline by dragging our playhead. There we can see the blur comes in, and by the time it gets to the end of the animation, the blur is completely gone. Let's try one more preset just so we can see the variety that we've got to choose from. I've still got my camera icon selected, so I'm going to go back to Motion Presets. I'll scroll up to the top, and we've got that Bounce Smoosh one. Now you can see by the preview that we've got some scale changes going on and a couple of different bounces in this one. So I'm just going to click Apply. I'll replace the current motion object with a new selection, and we've got a much longer span here for our preset. Let me click to get rid of that motion preset window, and let's preview our animation. I'm just going to go back to the control menu and hit rewind and then play so we can see the whole thing. And there's our camera. Now you can see everything else has disappeared off the screen, but we're seeing those scale changes and all the bounces in here as well. Just for fun, let's go back to the beginning of our timeline. I'll click to bring my playhead back to frame 1, and let's change the start position. I'll grab the camera at that point, and I'm just going to drag it over to the other side of the screen, and you can actually see the path that's created for this one is giving me all the bounces, but it's also moving from the start point to the finish point as it does so. So we've got a much more interesting animation that we're working with here.